Um, okay, right. We will make a start. We've got a jam-packed session for you today. So thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully everyone's been able to join okay. And if you're joining us in your lunch, thank you for giving up your lunch break to come and hear from us. We've been overwhelmed, actually, quite frankly, with the level of interest for this session. We were keen as a media agency to make sure that people had the information that they needed with the changes happening across Meta, which have been percolating for some time, which George will go into in a bit more detail, but it's kind of finally crunch time with a lot of it. So um, please do throw any questions that you have into the Q&A. Due to the amount of information that we want to get through, we are probably not going to be able to answer every question either live or immediately in the session. So our trusty colleague Sam is in the background and he will be making sure that we got a copy of every single question and we will answer every single question and we will email that out as a PDF in the coming days after the event so that you can see the broad spectrum of questions and the answers associated. So don't feel like if you post something in there and you don't get an answer, it's not going to give you an answer. We will get to it. Also, you are welcome to post any questions you have and also kind of follow up with us directly via a form, which I'm just going to link into the chat here. So do feel free to use that form to ask us a question. You can arrange a call, and as it mentions there, we're offering a free audit at the end of this session, which George will kind of cover off in a bit more detail. So my name's Jordan. I'm head of program development at Navigator. We are a lead generation media agency. However, we do loads of other things that a lot of people don't realize that we do as an agency. So we are a one-stop shop for a lot of charity clients in terms of providing them with support in their fundraising, generating new leads, but also stewarding existing supporters through various different channels and acquisition techniques. George?
Thanks very much. Thanks, Jordan. So yeah, we're going to get into the content now. There's clearly quite a lot of content to go through. I would say we'll be about 30 minutes in total. And just to reiterate what Jordan was saying before, please, if you have any questions now or afterwards, please use the Q&A and/or follow up with us at the end. The contact details are at the end of the deck. I think what I will also just say is, as a kind of a precursor, is that we need to be slightly broad with what we're going through here, because every organization is going to have a different, very specific set of needs or situations. So we are quite high level, but again, we're very happy to look at very specific cases afterwards. So where I wanted to just start with initially, some of the motivation for us doing this session today was of course, because we like to share what we know and what we understand and what we learn. But also we were kind of aware that there's quite a lot of information being posted out on various different forums. Some of it is slightly inaccurate or potentially a little narrow. And so we wanted to just kind of set the stall with all of the information, really. So I think the top three things we wanted to address just initially were that these changes to source categorization are purely for healthcare and or the healthcare vertical. So in actual fact, it can affect any charity across any vertical. And we're going to climb down into some of that information in a moment. But if you're a charity organisation or any other business or solution provider, that will have an impact potentially on you, and certainly for charities, non-profits, promoting social issues could be impacted. And the other piece is around dedicated landing pages. So there's some advice that implies that you can or you must now restructure your main domain. and or set up subdomains or dedicated landing pages. Now, again, we'll come on to this in further detail. That is a route. However, it's not explicitly stated by Meta that that is a workaround or a dodge. And I think, again, the term workaround or dodge kind of implies that that's not a strategy, that's not a long-term plan, that's something that is just enabling us to get around the problem right now, but we're not really addressing the root cause. And then the final one was timeline and scope. So again, generally speaking, all of the content that we've seen suggests that January is the kind of key focus for change. But in reality, this will likely roll out in waves and may later expand and kind of intensify. So you may not get caught by these restrictions right now, but you may in the future, for example. And in terms of the actual process that's happening in the back end, in terms of those restrictions, they may also then intensify in the future. So three things we wanted to just quickly address before we get into the content. So just kind of starting from the beginning, in terms of context, the context of change, generally speaking, the driving force behind these changes from Meta is because Meta is on a mission, quite rightly, around user protection and increasing data privacy. So there have been occurrences in the past around legal and reputational risks around the handling of data, and also the data points that Meta has on lots and lots of different individuals. And in its quest to improve this process, they are starting to filter out certain data signals that it deems too sensitive. So again, from a point of view of what Meta is doing, the type of information that it's allowing to be shared with it, and also the type of data that it's searching for across the web and across its apps, that's also changing. And again, we're going to come into more detail. But I think right now, just because this is happening doesn't mean that this is the first thing that's happened. And I think this gives us quite a clear picture, ultimately, where Facebook is going and why that should change our focus and potentially our long-term plans with Meta. So on the right, for those of you that have used Meta for a long time, for several years, you may recognize this image. This was Audience Insights. This was an amazing tool. So as media planners, we could use this tool to look at key demographics, size of audiences. We could go into really, really detailed interest targetings, the types of connections that individuals had, the types of pages that people were following, which was awesome when you were legitimately using the ad framework in order to get your brand in front of potential supporters. However, it was being misused by more unscrupulous advertisers, and so it was sunset. So it was removed. And on the left, you can see we've just taken a couple of high-level snips of various news articles about Facebook removing other targeting features. One of these dates back to 2018. There were changes pre-2018 as well. So what the point I'm trying to make here is that long term, this is a process that Meta is going through, and I suspect that all kind of targeting, really, from an interest perspective, is very likely to go away in the future. So from a Meta perspective, Meta is absolutely vast. I'm probably teaching you how to suck eggs by saying that, but the Meta platform isn't just what goes on Ads Manager or on Facebook when people are online. It spans across websites via cookies, directly and indirectly, across various different apps and other offline sources. So data that is held by Meta is read by Meta. So that's where it's going out and is scanning websites, is scanning user behavior, but it's also got data that we're sharing with it. So for example, the custom list or the customer list function allows us to upload offline data in order to help the efficacy of ad campaigns. So there's a significant amount of data that Meta is sat on. So what's happening is Meta will now automatically determine how your data source may be categorized. The term categorized is also kind of pooled, so they're pooling this data into a series of categories, which I'm going to run in a second. Um, and essentially, what's happening is when the data is categorized into these different pools, and it's in one of the pools that has restrictions on it, there may then be restrictions that are applied to your particular ad account. And the variance of restriction we're going to come on to, but that will also differ between content, vertical, application, and things. So the implied impact of these changes is that you'll get reduced performance and or you'll get a reduced ability to optimize. So for some, I think these changes seem quite scary, and there's a bit of a question mark over how Meta will be used in the future. But actually, that really isn't the case. Kind of spoiler alert, and I'll come on to onto why we think that in a moment. So how it works, like with most things with Meta, it's all automated. So Meta is automating the scan of various different domains and ad traffic and app traffic, and then is tagging those sources of data. So in plain English, it's scanning your website. If it deems that your website is in one of these restricted categories, you get a tag against your website. And that then may lead to these particular restrictions being applied. So if your main website or donation page has a heavy focus on a particular topic that falls under these categories, then that's the theory is that's where the restrictions are applied. The reason it's done automatically and via automation is because of the sheer vast size of Facebook and the amount of users and the amount of advertisers using the platform, and it works very similar to a number of community standards and terms and conditions, just like if you run lottery within your organization, lottery ads, you need to apply for an RMG authorization or whitelisting, real money gambling application. That whole process is automated. There's no human intervention there. And sometimes Meta gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong, and then we need to challenge Facebook to recheck. So I'm not going to go through all of these data source categories, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the top ones really. So health and wellness, aka healthcare, medical conditions, content on the website that contains medical conditions, health statuses, provider-patient relationships. So if you have a patient portal or a tracker where individuals are putting information in, that is one of the most key areas from a sensitivity perspective. Facebook is naturally nervous about that kind of information getting onto the platform. But generally speaking, from financial services, race, religion, gender, nationality, etc., it's all in there. So when we look at the potential restrictions that may be applied, there are three key restrictions potentially. So the first one is called core setup. Now your ad account can go into core setup if you keep on breaching community guidelines. So you're posting content that's not okay, or for example, you don't have whitelisting to run a certain set of ads like lottery, and you just keep on trying to run ads. Ultimately, your ad account could either be banned, which is the kind of top measure, or you can go into core setup. So core setup addresses a number of different restrictions. So the first one is URLs that follow the domain. So for example, I've put in here charityabc.org, support us /regular giving /£25. So that's a fairly typical URL string for an individual who's gone onto your website. They've clicked ways to support you. They've clicked that they want to support you via a regular gift, and they've then chosen their value. The reason why that we want that kind of depth of information is because if we want to do some retargeting, or we want to put specific content in front of people who have clicked the support us, or We want to put content in front of people who have an even higher intent level, i.e., they clicked on the regular giving, so they've started to absorb information from you, or even greater intent, they've actually chosen how much they're thinking of supporting you by per month, but then they've abandoned their cart. We can put very specific content and different messaging in front of those people based on these different stages of the URL. Now, in core setup, we lose that ability. So the URL could then just be shortened to charityabc.org. So we don't know then what those individuals have done. They've simply, all we can see is that they've simply gone onto your website, they've clicked an ad, but we can't then tailor content to them. So that's somewhat restrictive when we're looking at retargeting and being honed with our messaging. From a custom parameters perspective, which is the second change, these are basically the standard parameters. So a standard parameter would be a purchase event, for example. So if somebody checks out on our regular giving page, there's a data signal that's sent from Meta or sent from the web page to Meta that tells us that somebody has purchased. The other one might be a content ID, for example. So content ID shows us that the individual clicked on ad number 4, copy variant 3. So again, the reason why that's really interesting and helpful is because when we're doing, or you're doing the audit of your ad account, you can see what particular creative is doing well. So the removal of custom parameters means that for the purchase event, what we may want to do is we may want to add currency, or more typically the value. So if somebody clicks the £5 a month button, or they click the £25 a month button, we would like to know which individuals are choosing one value or another. And likewise, from a content ID perspective, we want to know which particular ad those individuals are clicking on. So that may then go away again, which impacts optimization. The other three are slightly more generic. So custom audiences may not work as you would expect. So custom audiences generally rely on custom parameters. So kind of, as I mentioned before, with the support us regular giving £25, we could create an audience of the most engaged people visiting the website as a particular audience. Now, if the URLs are hampered, we can't use those. The custom audience then can't be used, or it can't be updated. So those two, the custom audiences not working, and the ones that custom audiences not created are from an ads perspective, they may also be impacted, because if your audience is shrinking because you're not getting the same level of data being put into those audiences, that has a huge impact on performance potentially. And then the final one is automatic advanced matching, also known as AAM. So AAM is essentially a setting that you put in the back end, where Meta is hoovering up if a user puts in their name or their email address, that's automatically pulled out of the data signal and matched against an individual on Facebook. That's done in an encrypted way and does help optimize and does help the performance of campaigns. But AAM may also then be unavailable too.
George, just to quickly interrupt at that point, couple of questions have come through which I just think would be useful to address live, if that's okay, at this point. So the first one is just clarity over when these changes are actually coming into effect.
So it's this month, basically. So within the next week or two. But as I kind of mentioned a moment ago, these changes, we don't really know what level of change and how intense they're going to be. So I would say that these changes have started about 5 years ago, and they're just intensifying every year. So in this current wave, the next batch of changes are due to happen this month. And then there's likely to be waves of other changes in the future.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked a handful of questions, which we'll come to in the PDF at the end. But one of them is just you asked about how you'd go about challenging a criteria categorization with Facebook. George will come on to that shortly. Uh, and then Lauren Jones has asked if you already fall into one of these categories, for example, with the political declaration, how will this change for organizations already restricted, or is this only a big change for those not currently categorized?
So the way we read it, it's any advertiser. So if you're already in a restricted category and you've already been categorized, then that continues to be the case. If I know you didn't ask this question, but if you feel like you have been incorrectly categorized, then you can still review that categorization to potentially get it lifted. Typically, through discussion with other organizations, we found that if there has been a categorization applied, necessarily there hasn't been an impact on their ad account, and so it hasn't been challenged.
Brilliant. All right, thank you. Carry on.
So I was just going to say that this core setup is in my mind the most aggressive restriction, and that's on the basis that if you're using Meta already to acquire supporters and or using it for brand awareness, but certainly for the acquisition of new supporters, this is the one that is the most hand-tied, really, because this wouldn't allow you, in terms of how I've laid it out, wouldn't allow you to optimize the performance of your campaigns. The other two potential restrictions then are the restriction on certain standard events. So, for example, at the bottom of the funnel, from a conversion perspective, you would use the sales objective. So they may then disappear. That whole objective may disappear. And so what you would need to do to overcome that is just shift your focus onto top and middle of funnel. So typically, top of funnel is about generating traffic, generating clicks and or engagement, which I'm going to come on to on the next one. So it kind of means that what you can only do is run traffic, which, again, the way I'm saying that sounds like it's a negative, but really that isn't the case, and I'll come on to why I say that in a moment. But the restriction on the standard events wouldn't allow you to run a sales campaign. And then the third one is basically full restriction. So it restricts all events and all ability to optimize. So all you could really do is just run a campaign, but it would likely the performance of that campaign would likely degrade over time. So that would render the ad account fairly useless. Really, it would be akin to having a ban. So I kind of alluded to this a moment ago, and I mentioned this term dodge. The various reports and forums that we've been absorbing and engaging with over the last week or so has certainly suggested that you can run a dedicated landing page or subdomain to circumvent these restrictions. So it is absolutely factually correct, I think, that you could do that, and not a number of organizations already do that anyway, because they have dedicated landing pages for dedicated products or dedicated content. But I think ultimately, my point would be that is really you're dodging what's being put in front of you, rather than trying to address what's in front of us and making a plan for it. I'm not saying it's the same as GDPR, but if there were restrictions that were imposed initially with GDPR, the response wasn't that we'd work out a way to get around it. We embraced it and then worked through it. So and again, even though running a dedicated landing page may be a legitimate route to go, the classification and the intensity of these changes is likely to increase over time as it gets stricter and or more clever. I think the takeaway from this slide is don't not use dedicated landing pages. I think my point is, if your response to getting around this is just to spin up a dedicated landing page, that isn't a strategy. So I'm going to just very quickly walk through how you check the data categories or the source data categories. We've got a more kind of robust process for this in terms of either there's a document that walks through and gives you more specifics, and or we can run through it as an audit for you. Again, that process is free, so we're quite happy to do that. But this is just a very kind of high level. So on the screen, you'll see that's the process, and I'm going to just do a quick run through with page snips to bring it to life. So the first thing you do is you go to business.facebook.com. That gets you into your business manager account. And on the left-hand panel, there's a section called Events Manager. Once Events Manager loads, you then click on Data Sources as step 2. Step 3, when you've clicked data sources, there'll be a list of your various data sources available. So these basically are the IDs or the pixel IDs that are running on the various landing pages, microsites, subdomains, domains, etc. So you click the one that's most relevant for your activity, and then that brings up your data sources page within Business Manager. What we're going to do is we're then going to click on Settings, scroll down to Manage Data Source Categories, and then click Manage. Just a side note, you may not see the Manage Data Source Categories in your Business Manager, and that automatically suggests that your data sources are not in any of the categories. So if that's the case, then right now there's really no action for you to take. One of our follow-up points is to make sure you're checking this regularly. So that may change in the future, and certainly post kind of the change coming in a couple of weeks. That could well change. So when you click Manage, this box then opens. This is just a test account that I'm showing you. So there's absolutely nothing in there. But if there was a restriction, it would be listed here, and then you can either confirm or challenge the decision of that. There was a question a moment ago around if your URL or your data source has been inaccurately categorized, you can request a review. So there's a message next to the particular URL that says request review, and you click that. Has got that wrong, and then hit submit, and that will then go off to be checked. Again, just like most checks on Meta, that is an automated process, so a human is very unlikely to be reading that. So be specific with your response, and then you'll get an email update once it's been reviewed, and you'll probably get 2 to 3 chances to review it before the decision is final. On a slight tangent, within Business Manager, when you're setting up a campaign or when your agency is setting up a campaign, there's a toggle button that allows you to determine that you're running ads that are related to social issues, elections, or politics. So again, the reason why this was introduced a couple of years ago is because typically it was because of the interference in international foreign elections. That's really where it came to a head. In particular, the Cambridge Analytica issue in the US. So in order to increase the level of authenticity and transparency to run those types of ads, Meta requires you to register as an organization of such, and also then to click the disclaimer. And there's on the disclaimer, there's then usually underneath that ad, it says something like paid for XYZ, or there's a couple of other potential disclaimers. What it also means is that anybody, the general public, can use Facebook ads library to then look at how much you're spending on those particular ads, who you're targeting, etc. So there's like the maximum amount of transparency, and that was Facebook at the time. That was their answer to kind of taking ownership of that particular issue. Social issues, clearly sensitive subjects, and they are very much related to those ads that may influence the outcome of something. So something being either an election result or proposed legislation. And what I would say is, and the reason why I think this is really relevant is because we often see when we're auditing ad accounts, new ad accounts, we often see that ads that are running on behalf of organisations are actually using that disclaimer setting unnecessarily. So not all charity ads need to sit within social issues, elections, or politics. Yes, it may be related to, and typically, if you're an advocacy type organisation and you're championing change and you're asking the public to get behind you, then absolutely that is looking to change proposed legislation, or you're asking groups of people to do things, and that's relevant. But not all ads fit within that camp. And I think really, if you're running that, if you're using that disclaimer setting, I would double check that. Every organisation is going to have their own view on it, and so all we can really say is just definitely be comfortable that that is the right thing to be doing. And the reason we say that is because I feel like it's an own goal. If you're an organization that's running ads with that disclaimer setting set unnecessarily, all you're doing is you're opening yourself up to being labeled or categorized as an organization running social issues ads, and you may then be incorrectly categorized. And then example of those ad types, I've just left these in here just for reference for when we send this over, really. But what we can see is that most charity verticals in some way or another are within here, and I think that's typically why there's some not, I wouldn't go as far as confusion, but just some overuse of that particular setting. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the session now, so I'm going to just run through the final couple of slides. So when we look at planning for the future, in our opinion, and as shared, these changes will become more and more prominent. The removal of audience insights at the time felt like a real blow, but that's kind of nothing now in comparison to what's potentially what's coming around restrictions on ad accounts. And so relying on Meta as much as we did previously, like 5 years ago, is probably a mistake. In 2024, I'd say late 23, and certainly all throughout 2024, audience engagement really and success of Facebook advertising was run by the power of creative and by using a funnel process. So top, middle, and bottom of funnel with content and a structure and a tone of voice and an approach that's relevant to each one of those stages. So top of funnel, we're talking about stats and information about the brand. Middle of funnel, we're talking about impact, and bottom of funnel is about the call to action. If you allow your creative to do that work for you, you actually don't need audience targeting. And so I think that's a really, really key point, and that process is becoming amplified now with other platforms such as TikTok. So our point here from a planning for the future perspective is we don't need to rely so much on audience targeting. Just ensure that your strategy aligns to creative doing 85% of the work. The third point is checking the categorization regularly. So just because you're not caught in the restriction or the categorization right now doesn't mean that you might be in the future. And if you do have a restriction applied or a category applied, it's not always forthcoming. And so ensuring that you're checking that so that you can challenge if necessary is kind of key. One of the processes that Meta goes through when it's setting a campaign to live is, of course, it's looking at the ads and the settings that you've put on Business Manager. It's also doing a full check of the website in terms of, does the copy of the ad relate to the copy on your website? It's felt that it's also doing checks across the different subpages, things like privacy policies. So just ensure that they are also up to scratch. And I've already talked about the ads disclaimer. I think just ensure that it's used in the correct context. Subdomains and microsites definitely provide short-term opportunities. But I think you use those as part of the overall plan rather than just trying to get around a particular issue that's being presented right now. And then this point around first party data. So the more that we are relying on our own data rather than the data of Meta, I think the better position we're in, and the less vulnerable that we are for the future. So the vulnerability here is that we are requiring Meta to give us all of this insight and data on audiences, but they're then taking it away, and that has an impact on potential performance, ROI, efficacy of your advertising. It might impact your fundraising targets, et cetera, et cetera. And so first party data campaigns, which I'm going to come on to in a moment, first party data campaigns kind of remove that issue out of the equation because we're going to seek for a conversion elsewhere. And then the last point, and this is absolutely, we are advocates of Meta, and so we're not suggesting a mass exodus from the platform, but you should already be thinking about diversifying channels. So TikTok, for example, for lead generation, brand awareness, YouTube, Reddit, programmatic, DRTV, Facebook, et cetera. Many of you will already be doing that, and digital may be newer to your organization, but certainly something to consider. So I just mentioned this term first party data, and again, apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs. But first party data is the collection of data that's first party to the individual that you're collecting. So first and last name, email, phone number, maybe postal address, etc. And value exchange is a great way of collecting first party data and generating a relationship with a supporter that is on transparent and equal terms. So how we use value exchange is we're using the likes of Facebook for brand awareness, and we're using it for traffic, but we're then using a process where we're converting that particular supporter using telephone. So the power of Facebook is used very well, but we're less reliant on the bottom of funnel, really, in terms of making conversions on Meta, because we're seeking conversion elsewhere via a different method. And that method can also include email, DM, under legitimate interest and things. So in conclusion, keep an eye on your categorization. If you're unaffected now, doesn't mean you're not going to be affected in the future. Be proactive and test alternative approaches, and certainly lead on creative and having a first party data approach. If that's not the case right now, it will be very, very soon. We always say keep internal teams updated, knowing that 85% of the power of your Facebook activity is delivered by creative. Not all organizations are necessarily across that brief. At the end of the day, the real power lies in your data strategy. So thank you very much. I'm going to now hand over to Jordan to close.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, George. We do have some time, so actually, I think if we just take a look at some of these questions that have come in. So you've already covered about how, when kind of questioning the status or the categorization, that it's more likely an AI system of some sort that is going to be reviewing that and then making a decision. Question here from someone was, will it see things like gifts in wills as end of life care? And how do we find out its criteria?
Yeah, so great question. We don't know that. And it will really all depend on that automated scan that Facebook's going to do, what it particularly reads into that type of content, that type of narrative suggests that it's going to be. I would certainly suggest that's going to be a sensitive area, but just how much it picks up on that in particular, we will have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's a little bit of finding our feet as we go. Mike Butler has asked, you mentioned about it's shortening URLs to basically the home page. How do we check if this is then happening? This feels like a huge there's a word missing there, Mike. I think you mean change. This feels like a huge change for running ads, more so than optimizing restrictions.
Yeah, so if you fall into that core setup, there will be a notification, and the ability to create custom audiences by URL will just be grayed out or removed altogether. So the functionality of Ads Manager will be reduced, and therefore you'll know that that's been applied.
Great. If you already do dedicated landing pages, should we be considering changing to the alternate method? And what is the alternate?
Yeah, I think the amount of organisations already using dedicated landing pages, so I don't think you should change that. We are proponents of using dedicated landing pages. It's a great thing in terms of flexibility, and the reason why they're used has a lot of merit. So we're certainly not saying not to do that, but the point was more about if you think you can just get around the issue by taking individual users from Facebook off of your main website and putting them onto a landing page. Our point is that's not really a strategy. The alternative is to consider this notion of first party data and campaigns that are structured as such. So don't just look for conversions on Meta. Look to make those conversions off of Meta as well. If you're not doing that already, Value Exchange is probably one of the best examples of doing that.
Great, thank you. So as an organization that is slash was planning to ramp up Meta activity, we want to get an idea of testing the potential future impact of this. If you are flagged, is it too late to set up a donation conversation pixel is written here? I think you mean conversion, to test the difference between conversion and traffic optimization ads within the extension window.
Yeah, so I think the extension window is only 30 days, I believe, anyway.
And you have to have already applied for that, I believe.
Yeah, and so if you're, well, I think you are still able to apply for an extension right now, but it's only a 30-day window. I'll answer this question as if you potentially as if you have been flagged already. I think if you have already been flagged, then your ability to run bottom of funnel or sales objective based campaigns will have already disappeared. So looking at your ads manager account will already tell you that. If you haven't been flagged, and I would then suggest that yes, you can still run those optimizations already. I think there's still clearly an element of unknown here in terms of speed of delivery of rollout, intensity of rollout across several different waves over the next potentially 1, 3, 6, 12 months. So again, there's an element of waiting to see about that.
How could we go about double checking the disclaimer? We use the social issues, elections, and or politics setting, and would be great to know if it's unnecessary.
Yeah, so we can. I can't remember if we put it in it. I'll put it. I didn't put the link, the meta link, in the references. So we've got a number of references here at the end of the doc, with in terms of where we've got this information from. So I'll put it in there. That's quite detailed in its analysis and its use. Again, we are happy to have a conversation with you directly about that. And give you a steer. Ultimately, from an organisational perspective, you will need to make that decision.
And then someone's asking about whether the the changes are going to affect any additional GA, so Google Analytic tracking added to ad links.
Yeah, again, unknown right now. I think like with other meta restrictions, it's typically on platform. There's a whole other conversation around cookies and cookie tracking, cookie use, which I would say is pretty separate from this particular issue.
Brilliant. Zainab has asked, in terms of diversifying which channels to use, our ads are targeted for an older age group of 50 plus. What would you suggest in terms of channels suited for this age range? Because something like TikTok and Reddit is probably less useful for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. Reddit's really interesting as well because I'd say that's a real opportunity. That particular platform is underutilized. TikTok, yes, it is for a younger audience, but the 30, I think it's the 30 plussers on that particular platform are the largest growing audience. And so they're only kind of 5 to 10 years away from being a potential prospect for a lot of RG activity. Um, in terms of content specifically for Facebook for that audience, if you're using a top, middle, and bottom of funnel, then as I kind of just went through before, you want to be talking about stats and information about the cause first, and then reviewing who's engaging with that type of information, and then retargeting into middle of funnel with more information around impact. I don't know clearly, but I would say at some point, I would imagine the age definition will also disappear because there may be a feeling that that's also too sensitive and information to share with advertisers because they're putting content in front of people because of their age.
Mhm.
So again, how we would relay that, you can relay that using your creative, what you're talking about, and what you're showing in your video and all statics.
Yeah. And Zainab as well, I think, the majority of charities will be likely at targeting an older audience with that. So it's something that we're all going to kind of find ourselves in a challenging situation. So I think just ultimately diversifying the channels that you use as best as you possibly can means that you're not relying on that one source. And as George touched on in his final few slides, ultimately this could be a really positive thing to help charities kind of be nudged back into making sure we're making really strong relationships and lasting connections with individuals. The conversion piece happening on Meta removes the need to telephone them, removes the need to write to them, or kind of send them something out. So I think there's a positive here is that we can start to engage more directly with these individuals, and it's that can't be a bad thing, certainly for a legacy audience.
Definitely. I think just one other point to add around age, the use of age, and even gender, the gender options that are in Ads Manager. From the testing that we've done, if you're specifying age and or gender, it actually has a poor impact on performance. So actually leaving it broad, so anyone who's 18 plus, no gender selected, those types of campaigns do better. And that's because Meta has a drive for them making the decisions rather than you making the decisions. So some of the audit criteria we look at is the use of those definitions. We've come across a number of instances fairly recently where there's testing at age level, so like 18 to 25, 26 to 35, and they're actually audiences that are being tested. If you did a case by case, an A/B test versus a broad audience where none of those definitions are made, I would suggest that the broader audience had better performance, better click through, lower cost per thousand.
Yeah, yeah, and that's certainly something I saw in my previous charity role as well. The broader audiences did perform better than those targeted. Okay, so someone's asked about they've already got an event set up. They are categorized correctly, which is great. But they're struggling to delete this event for an unknown reason. They're asking about whether they would just lose access to data from these people, or do they all have to be deleted entirely so as not to run the risk of something such as a ban?
Yeah, that may be one that we could probably do is just having a specific conversation
Yeah,
about what those different parameters are. I mean,
yeah,
I think if yeah, I think we probably need to know the detail on that one. I think one of the things we didn't necessarily talk about today is custom events. because that may be another opportunity in terms of getting detail out of Meta if it's not allowing um, uh, uh, aggregation of data to come through their standard events. So custom events could be used. So yeah, I don't know if that individual is using custom events or a standard one, but if you follow up afterwards, we can give you a view on it.
Great. Coming from a cancer charity, would this be really affected by the changes?
I think it depends on the content on your particular website. So kind of just going back into the first couple of slides around categorization and what it means, and the type of sensitive information that's being shared. If it's informational and you're promoting the great work that you do, I don't see why that's sensitive necessarily. If you're asking for individuals to take part in a fairly detailed personal survey that comes out with a score of the likelihood of getting cancer because you're X, Y, Z. That sort of information that's being fed automatically into Meta would be sensitive in my mind, and so yeah, you'd be more likely to be restricted, I think, or categorized. So I think it all really depends and hinges on what sort of information that you're asking users to input on your website and what type of content you've got displayed on your website.
Great. Lauren Jones has asked, we moved to inbuilt Facebook forms for data collection a while ago and have seen much better results. Is this still a good idea, or should we be using a range of data capture tools?
Um, Great to hear that lead forms are working. And necessarily lead forms may also be one of the lower funnel objectives that's removed with restrictions as well. So they may not be around for forever. But we, just kind of not answering that question within the framework of this deck and just talking more generally about performance of lead gen forms. We find the performance of lead gen much stronger on dedicated landing pages than we do on Facebook. The intent of the user is much higher when they go to a dedicated website rather than on Facebook itself. So that is a great reason as to why you would consider using landing pages, because strategically we get better performance, the intent level is higher, and the cost per result is lower. Yeah, if you're only using landing pages, then to answer your question, have a consideration of using. Sorry, if you're only using lead forms, then to answer your question, consider using a dedicated landing page to test as well.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, do you foresee other advertising platforms following suit and restricting down?
Yeah, I guess so. Facebook is arguably the most mature now, and so they're going through this process. Anecdotally, we talk and other agencies talk about TikTok being like Facebook 5 or 7 years ago, and so right or wrong, there are less restrictions on platforms like TikTok right now. That's not a pro or a con. That's just the view. So I would imagine that those platforms would follow suit at some point in the future, or they'll already start to bake in that kind of functionality earlier on, so it's not a change for the future.
Brilliant.
Anyone who uses TikTok Ads Manager will know that it's almost a carbon copy of the Meta Ads Manager.
Excellent. Okay. Well, as is the way with these Zoom webinars, they immediately end and boot everyone out at half past. So very conscious not to do that. So as we've said, a PDF of today's deck, along with a PDF of the questions and answers to go with those will be shared via email. It will be the email that you registered to join us with. A recording of the session will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well, so you can play that back and share with any colleagues. And a reminder that you can submit a form with your information to either ask another question, arrange another follow-up chat if you've got more questions about this specifically, and if you want to book in your free Meta audit, which is normally worth about £500. So do consider that, and just any other questions and thoughts, just get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Our emails have been above us throughout the duration, so please do also reach out directly. And as George highlighted, these references will be clickable links within the PDF. So you can go and find more information. There is a lot on this. It is a bit of a minefield. That's why we kind of put this together for everyone today. Hopefully, that has been of use. And I think the key takeaway is to just make sure you understand how it could affect your organization. Don't panic too much about it. It's something that's been coming for quite some time now, and it will probably continue to develop into other changes. And just speak to your internal teams and agencies if you've got them. Ask them questions. They're there to help you. Um, so that is it. Thank you ever so much, and have a great rest of your Monday.